you. That will help. It's way over here. No, thanks for coming in today with the annual report, and you've got a wee presentation. Did you want to present that now and then take questions afterwards?
We'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
And we're grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for having us again. Paul and Matt and I will just step through a very brief presentation and then open for questions. Just to get started, I think it's important to remind ourselves of the fabulous group of assets that the city owns, fully owns Enable, Citycare Group, EcoCentral and DCO and RBL Property Limited, and of course majority owns the airport in Orion. The year that we're here to talk about, FY24, was a really challenging year for CCHL, and I think I'd just like to acknowledge the subsidiary companies, their boards, their chief executives and executive teams, and all of the people within their businesses who contribute to the outcomes that they've achieved. And I'd also like to acknowledge Paul and Matt and the CCHL team, because despite the challenges that were encountered within CCHL, particularly at the governance level, the results that have been delivered are very pleasing, and it is testament to the focus and the mahi of the subsidiaries and of the CCHL management. So Matt, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Really pleased to present the 2024 annual report and what we describe as a solid year of financial performance. Firstly, an apologies from me. The length of it is, I think it's over 140 pages, but I didn't write the accounting standards that took it to that level. And solid really is the right word to describe the annual report this year. I think 5 of the 6 operating businesses outperformed what we describe as their operating budgets and their financial targets in their own right, which is no mean feat in an economic environment that is challenging. I know just yesterday there was talk of a 75 basis points rate cut, which is really unprecedented in what is normal times. Happy with the results of the operating companies as a whole. Unfortunately, tax stole the show, and I've been here in front of you before talking about tax. So NPAT was nominally lower than projected at $68 million. This largely reflected the legislative change around deferred tax of $43 million across all the operating companies. Adjusted for this, NPAT was up at $111 million for the year on the $99 million in FY23. Just to briefly touch on a few successes. The number at the top left corner is $450 million. And we're really proud of that. That's an EBITDA that's up nearly $70 million year on year. Continued success at the airport, the bounce back post-COVID, the property portfolio with its strong portfolio of leases and development of new city and aeroplane connections to the world direct out of Christchurch. Orion's continued its investment and development and resilience of the network through FY24 with substation and lines upgrades. Enable's reached a period, what we describe as a mature asset these days, passing over 200,000 homes in Canterbury with an extremely high quality product. Citycare continued the diversification of its business based around its 4 operating businesses, including the first full year of Spencer Henshaw, and that continues to track positively to the original business case expectations. EcoCentral depots served over 500,000 customers, continued focus on diverting tonnes from landfill, whether for reuse or recycling, with minimal contamination, largely thanks to the very modern materials recycling facility that we have. And Littleton Port, despite trade volumes being softer than we wanted going in to the year and misaligned with our expectations, I've been here before where there were logistics and supply chain challenges in a number of places around the world, which made that business harder than expected, but year on year it contributed positively at the EBITDA level. Just briefly to touch on the parent. And so the subsidiary operating performance gave rise to valuations being up across the board. So that was approximately $250 million positive revaluation in the name of the parent. and parent debt was steady with distributions at approximately a little bit over 80% of the parent's profit being paid out as a dividend, culminating in the $50.7 million distribution to council. There's, I guess I've touched on it briefly in terms of the tax thing, but the return on equity is noted in the papers as being lower than desirable, really a combination of the valuations being up, and therefore the denominator in the equation is always a challenge. You're chasing your tail against very high quality, highly valued assets, and the tax that I mentioned previously around the deferred tax expense negatively impacting the bottom line at a group level at least. But in any event, the desire, and in line with council's expectation, there is a desire to increase the cash returns to council going forward as part of our contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Quite obvious to all of you, but the value that we seek to create at CCHL extends beyond just the financial dimension, and so we've continued to evolve and mature our approach to value creation over the past 12 months. It's probably an unseen piece of work. It tends to find its way into reports rather than into the stories we'd like to tell. But in our annual report, we've provided an updated version of our value chain. And essentially what this represents is an acknowledgement from us that the subsidiaries, or the ownership interest in the subsidiaries that we manage on your behalf, has a very large economic, environmental and social footprint. And it's really important that as the provider of long-term essential infrastructure assets and services that we manage that in a responsible manner. So what we've sought to do in rethinking our value chain is be really clear about how we define our capitals, what we are working with or what we have access to in respect of those capitals, what we intend to do that. So what are we seeking to deliver in utilising those capitals, and if we're successful in pursuing those objectives, what outcomes we will achieve. And those outcomes do align to your own strategic framework and the strategic priorities that you set at the beginning of each council term. So this is going to be an iterative process for us. We will continue to evolve and mature, but we feel like we've made significant steps this year. And the annual report addresses some of the more specific initiatives. So I'll just, I won't go through each of these, but probably just highlight a couple of things. So one is we've produced and reported our first gender pay gap. When we got that first piece of work back, it identified a gender pay gap on a base salary level at 4.5%, and that's kind of within the margin of error. So we could have sat back and gone, actually largely job done in that respect, but we took an executive decision that that's not the right approach, and what we should report on is total remuneration. And what that demonstrated is not only is the gap wider, but it clearly demonstrated that men had a greater opportunity to benefit from other allowances and loadings than women did across the group. So we're developing an action plan to address that, and be looking to initiate that action plan over the course of this year to work with the subsidiaries to help address that gap. The other thing that we've done, which is a material piece of work, is we're about to report our first set of climate-related disclosures. We'll do that next week. It does include the group emissions reduction plan, but goes well beyond that, because the climate-related disclosures have to talk to how we intend to manage our exposure to climate change, how we govern it, how we embed it into our strategy, how we think about risks and opportunities and how we mitigate those, how we address the current and anticipated financial impacts. So it's a comprehensive piece of work. It's only year one. It's another thing that will continue to evolve. And we are going to workshop that with you, I think, on November the 12th, we're down for. So that's probably the other substantial piece of work that we've completed this year in this space.
Yeah, so just looking forward, in support of the mandate from Council, we're going to be evolving our ownership approach and operating model to reflect that more active and responsible lens that you've directed us to have. What's going to be fundamental to that is the strengthening of the relationships with Council and with the subsidiaries and other key stakeholders. And in strengthening those relationships and having stronger connections across the group, we intend to build a deeper common understanding of the key strategic issues that we're facing across the portfolio. And, there's no doubt there are some confronting challenges on the horizon, and they do have potential implications for the city and the region. But, we have those on our radar. We do have time to carefully consider them. We do have time to work with you and with the subsidiaries to develop that deeper common understanding, so that we put ourselves in a position, armed with that deep common understanding across the subsidiaries, CCHL and Council, we put ourselves in the best position to make good long-term decisions that are in the best interests of the city and the region. So I don't think there's anything there to be overly concerned about, but it is important that we keep those matters at the forefront of our minds at CCHL, and that we manage them appropriately with you and with the subsidiaries, so that we're all able to hold hands and make good decisions in the fullness of time. And just before I conclude, I would also like to acknowledge Councillors MacDonald and Templeton, and the Deputy Chair of CCHL, Gil Cox, who's also in the room, and Bridget Geeson, who's an independent director of CCHL. Those directors have played a really valuable role in stabilising CCHL through the difficult period we had earlier in the year. And it's thanks to them and the management and the subsidiaries that we're able to report to you today with such a positive performance. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation, and there's a huge amount of work going on there in a whole range of areas. I think it's excellent to get this update. I just had a question about the climate statement. How often do those get produced? Is it every year or less?
Yeah, so as a climate reporting entity, we have an obligation to report every year.
Right.
The joys of us as a parent means that each of the subsidiaries has to produce a climate statement as well. So you can imagine everyone's gone from 0 to 100 in year one, and we've had to consolidate 6 entities who are doing their first climate statements into our climate statement, so as a CCHL group climate statement.
Yeah.
And the approach is largely set by regulatory authorities, so the XRB and FMA. But the important thing for these statements is that they're not just a compliance exercise, they're actually strategic in their intent. And that's what we intend to try and lift and mature in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Great, I'll open up for questions. Does anyone have any questions on the report? Yanni.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing and for the presentation. I was particularly interested in the target not being achieved or only partially being achieved around, it's on page 193, which is around the senior executive remuneration. It just says that CCHL will ensure subsidiaries report annually the highest and lowest remuneration in each company. And then it goes on that there's been no agreed approach other than reporting the highest a commitment to the living wage. So I was just trying to understand, get a sense of, and in the past, we've been told we have to wait for the annual reports to see what the trends are. But are you able to tell us what's happening in terms of the trend of senior executive remuneration? And just mindful that there's been some media, for example, around the port, where there's been a significant increase in the number of people paid over certain bands at the highest end.
Yeah, I mean, I'll address the later point last. Just in terms of the work we're doing in this space. So one of the things that became obvious to me when I stepped in as chief executive was that there was some clear intent to do more substantive work in strengthening pay equity across the group. And there were some kind of tools or levers that were identified. So, and one of which is the living wage, and the other was identifying the gap between the lowest and highest paid. What I found is that there's a reporting approach to those, which doesn't actually necessarily mean a lot. So I think this time last year, I was quite clear that it was going to be actually really difficult to actually close the gap in an environment where wages were increasing strongly right across the economy. So in absolute terms, the executive teams have probably seen something like 3 to 4% wage increases, and those are probably flattening off more towards 0 than 3 or 4 now, whilst broader wages went up by 6 or 7. But in nominal terms, the gap got wider, because when you're doing 3% off one number and 6% off a much lower number, you don't close the gap. So what we've done is we've sat back and said, okay, what does pay equity actually mean? And let's look at this in a more structured context, and how do we think we can introduce a range of levers to help close or to help strengthen pay equity or equitable outcomes from wages right across the group. And that's a piece of work that's in our current year program that we'll be coming back to you with our thoughts around that.
Okay, likely time frame for getting that work done?
Well, we put it in our fiscal year 25 work program, so and it's on the chief executive to deal with. So
the other thing that struck me in the report was that some of the directors' fees, we've got a chair of one board getting $170,000.
yeah,
and it's City Care, which is one of the smaller companies. So just, are you able to give us a sense of what's happening in that director fees space and why there seems to be such huge variances?
yeah. So the reporting requirements are to report at a group level. So in the City Care context, the chair of City Care Group gets that number for his role as chair of the City Care Group. The reality is he chairs 2 entities, City Care itself and Spencer Henshaw. So when the Spencer Henshaw acquisition was made, there was a proposal at that time to have a governance structure which, from a CCHL point of view, we weren't that comfortable with. So we actually required City Care to strengthen its governance of Spencer Henshaw for the first 2 years of the acquisition period, and that was to ensure a successful acquisition and execution and implementation of the revised strategy. So that time frame is coming to an end, and you'll see those directors' fees normalise in the next year.
Right. And the other one that struck out to me was the development Christchurch. I mean, 25k a year for directors' fees, 60k for the chair. What development Christchurch, like what?
Well, I can tell you I'm the sole director of Development Christchurch, and I
you
get
got
$0,
Yeah,
and it increases by the same amount each year.
So what? Oh, so this is from the previous year before the changes. Is that?
So yeah, sorry, I was pretty sure we know those numbers. There should be an RBL. No, there's not even an RBL number. No.
Got a page number, Yanni?
Yeah, that's page 200.
So that relates to the Adventure Park.
Oh, right. Subsidiary.
It's the investment in. So DCL gets no directors at DCL receive any income.
Yeah.
All of those relate to the Christchurch Adventure Park director fees,
Right.
which
and
is a standalone entity as a subsidiary of 54% owned by Development Christchurch.
Yeah. Still seems quite high for a small operation, but is it benchmarked against other companies?
I think you'd find that the directors of the Christchurch Adventure Park are well below the minimum wage in terms of the number of hours they've put into managing that business over the last 5 years.
Yeah. And just the final question from me was, and I really appreciate the fact that you're reporting more on diversity, particularly around gender, but we still don't seem to be getting much reporting around diversity outside of gender, around directors and makeup. And I mean, I've understood in the past that there's been work going on in that space, but again, I just don't really see where that's coming to.
Yeah, so that's one of those things that comes with a lag. So what you're now seeing or starting to see is the benefit of the emphasis on gender diversity that really started 2 years ago, and strengthening that, and we continue to push hard in that in every round. In terms of ethnic diversity and age, I mean, those are proving to be more challenging because the skill set or the pool of people that have the required skill sets for our subsidiaries in that space is quite small. So what we've decided to do is that we'll undertake some targeted interventions. So we'll use the Associate Director Program as one tool that we can use to promote. We've done it with gender. We can do it in terms of targeting ethnic diversity and age in the future. So that's a much more effective tool than just requiring in each recruitment round that we pursue ethnic diversity as a matter of priority, because you can do it, but if the pool of people isn't out, then you can't find them. We're going to have to invest in growing that pool.
Tyrone, you had some questions? Any question?
Kia ora, and thank you for the work that you've all done. And look, it's really, the stability that you've brought to in your particular, Brian, since you've come on, it's been really greatly appreciated. The just in terms of looking forward and stakeholder engagement, are you aware of, or are there any conversations happening with Ngāi Tahu or the local rūnanga just around joint title on reclaimed land, on LPC land? I mean, that might be a question for LPC, or is that just a high level?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, we are aware.
Yeah.
There's probably some commercially sensitive matters that need to be discussed.
Right, all right.
Were any other questions? I had a few. And a lot of them are really relating to the feature that was on about in the paper about Littleton Port, because there was quite a lot of information sort of revealed in that last weekend that a lot of people wouldn't know about. And I was just wondering on there, one thing that concerned me personally in there was the CEO's statement that he didn't know why LPC's performance had deteriorated so badly, which is a statement I don't know that a CE should be necessarily making. They should probably know. So did you have any thoughts on that or comments about it?
Well, I can comment on my relationship with the Chief Executive of LPC, and I can tell you he's done a lot of work to understand the challenges that the port has had, and what they need to navigate in order to execute the opportunity, which was a strong feature of that article, which is to grow the port in coming years and decades. I think you'll find that, and I can't speak to him personally in terms of how he approached the interview, but when he gets, when those kind of questions are put in front of him, he doesn't want to get into the a kind of naming and shaming, blame the past kind of exercise. So he tends to just park that with those kind of comments.
Right. Okay. And the other one was the comments also around talks of LPC with DP World that have sort of become, he said that during that interview and said it's the worst kept secret. Now, again, my question around that is, now that's out there, why are these things secret and maybe more of us not knowing about that? I mean, from a public point of view, it maybe doesn't look so good. I don't know.
Yeah, no, again, I can comment on that because I get it myself. Whenever DP World come to Christchurch and they ask for a meeting, the first thing people are going to ask is why you met with them and for what purpose. The reality is that, that's a company that is investing quite significantly across the logistics space in New Zealand. So it's not just about port operations. There's a lot that they are doing. And so, there is a potential customer link between LPC and DP World, which is a perfectly reasonable and rational thing to discuss. As I said, what the CE was commenting on, which is the same thing I typically have to address, is that people see conspiracy when they see those meetings appear in your diary, and it's not the case.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Great. Well, we've got the resolutions there to receive the report, appoint me as proxy, and I'll agree to everything in the AGM. Did you want? Who wants to do that? Tim, and we'll have and Kelly moved and seconded. All those in favour. Is anyone going to get a debate? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, that's carried. Great. Well, thank you for coming in, and thanks for answering some hard questions there. So
May I have one?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to let you know that our chief executive process is proceeding very well.
All right.
And we expect to make an announcement shortly.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.